Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Bibles and Beer. This is our updated twist on the Wednesday night Bible studies that you may have grown up with. Today, Reverend Dr. David Breeden will offer readings from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures that make up the Bible. We'll cover some of the Christian basics and explore the Bible's themes, contradictions, and the curiosities. Tonight, well, you know what? My tower, it's bigger than yours. And you know what?
Tower.
Yeah, you know what? That might be a reference to the way you like your beer. Do you like it in a tall glass?
Well, yeah, I absolutely do. But this is not a tall boy. But it is very appropriate for building towers in the desert. Fire brick, and from Shell's Brewing Company. And you need to fire your brick well before you're going to build a tower all the way to attack heaven. So there you go, the beer of the evening, Shell's Fire Brick.
Oh, yeah. I don't got much. I just got a little bit of rum and Coke.
We're good. Okay. All right. We still haven't found a rum reference in the Hebrew scripture, but we're working on it.
We got to work on it. So you're hitting a set of passages that actually have a pretty big direction for me, and so I'm really quite excited. As a kid, I grew up. My father ran the creation science movement in Utah. He put on many of the conferences out there through the 80s and 90s. So I had Ken Ham in my house all the time. I had met him multiple times. I had a board game that I got from him way back in the day. So you're about to hit a set of passages that I'm really close to and I'm really curious about. So are you ready to dive on in?
Absolutely. We'll dive in, and then we will need to discuss some of those timetables that are going on out there. Hey, let's build a skyscraper. No problem. Yeah, this is one of those depictions of skyscrapers of the Tower of Babel that you can find online. There are a lot of fanciful ideas out there about what it looked like and how it might have operated. We'll get to probably what the real deal is in a little bit. But one of the key things that obsessed people in the ancient Near East was the preservation of the divine human boundary. It was of central interest to the people. They thought, okay, there have to be people over here and the gods are over here. And it's really bad things happen when the two cross each other. For example, we know from the Garden of Eden story that the whole concern of Yahweh was that people were going to get the knowledge of the gods, the knowledge of good and evil. And oh my gosh, we can't let that happen. The flood, Noah's flood, one of the next stories in there, is about how we have to wipe out the sinful offspring when the sons of God find human women awfully cute and interesting, and there begins this race of superhumans and mixing in with the gods, and that's one of the reasons for the flood. There you go. And then this one, which is about human beings crossing over that line from being little ants on the ground to coming up and storming the bastions of heaven. Oh my gosh, what would happen then? This is also an etiology story. You know, where does the mosquito get its buzz? And there's a little story. This is the story of how people started speaking so darn many languages. In ancient Hebrew, they were quite convinced that Hebrew was the language of God. We talked about that last week with Daniel being able to read this handwriting on the wall. Well, that's because the language that God is going to write is always going to be Hebrew. So how did it get to be that the true pure language, Hebrew in this story, becomes all of these other languages out there? That it is an etiology. It explains how that happened. But there are a couple of interesting questions about this story because we really aren't told what the spin is besides that concern about getting into the bastions of heaven. So is it about divine punishment for people trying, getting above their station? That's usually the way it's taught in Christian terminology. Or is it a story about Yahweh and the sons of God encouraging human beings to go forth and conquer the rest of the planet and create civilizations? And that's an open question. You can spin it either way. The flood and then a tower. humanity is wiped out. There are a few survivors. They're wiped out for some doing bad things, and then they do something else. They build some kind of a structure, a house, some tall building, a tower, etc. This motif goes all over the world. There are African stories about it, Mesoamerican here in this side of the planet, India, Native Americans. So there are lots of stories about a bad flood and then people getting together to build some kind of large structure after that. So it's a folk motif that appears everywhere. Also, there are at least 3 Near Eastern stories that have this in them. This one that we're going to be looking at tonight is probably taken from at least one of those other ones. And the story in the form that we have it tonight is about 3,000 years old, if not more. So this is an old folktale. Now, we got to go back a little bit, and we in Bibles and Beer, we will get around to Noah, but I want to kind of carry this idea of how civilization is occurring and why the gods don't want us to know what they know. So we're skipping over this, but we got to go back a little bit. So we have the flood. Everybody gets wiped out, of course, except for Noah and his family. And Noah has 3 sons. Yeah, there are women on the boat too, very fortunately for humankind, but we don't talk about them because this is a patriarchal society. Well, we're going to start at the beginning. Here is Adam. He lives 930 years. And then he has a son, and we, of course, know that there's another son or 2 in there that causes some problems. So Seth is going to be the Adam's son that brings humanity on into this newer world. Then Methuselah, yes, the oldest guy in the Bible who lived 969 years. It was a really old guy, as old as Methuselah is one of those folk motifs. There you go. He had a son by the name of Lamech, and then Lamech had a son by the name of Noah, who lived 950 years. And then this Noah guy and all the other people get wiped out, so, you know, it's easy to repopulate the earth, has 3 sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, all the sons of Noah. Shem is the one that's going to be in this actual genealogy that we're looking at here today, because he's the one that the Israelites considered to be their father, right? And then from there, it goes to Eber, and then to Terah, and then to Bing, Abraham, the father of the Israelite people. And so that's the way that they trace this in the old days. Now I'm going to pop back over because I want to hear from Justice for just a minute, because, you know, I'm just talking about those super old ancient people. How did they live? So, now, I mean, we know that this is not true, but we also know that a good number of people do think it's true. So how do they explain it?
Well, it comes from a lot of different ways. What I heard many times as a kid was that, you know, and here we were still at the early part. I was born in the 80s. And so we were still learning about biology, starting to understand more about DNA structures, things along those lines. And there was I was homeschooled, which also fits into this whole situation of where I come from. And so we got a very simplistic understanding of how heredity actually functions. And when we ask the question of why did these people live so long and we don't, the answer came back was, we were born, you know, Adam and Eve were perfect. When they sinned, they introduced corruption into their DNA.
Ooh.
And heredity caused the corruption to affect further DNA strands, which then went further and further and further and further. And thus we got to a place now that we live maybe 60 to 70 to 80 years old.
Okay, we get our 70 nowadays, right? So, and that's all you get. Bible says so, but that, which is a problem on the other end now that people are living considerably longer than that. But yeah, we didn't know anything about those things in my church when I was a kid. It's just, you know, the water was not polluted in those days, I guess. But,
well, it fit very much into the mindset with that, right? my mom was very healthy, health conscious, and
Mhm.
we would eat a lot of vegetables. And the thought process again was healthy living, right lifestyle. Living these ways not only helps your own body, but it also, because you have a spiritual strength, will help you live even longer. And there's a lot of, mushiness to those, because you can't ask too many questions without going too deep and getting off the rails.
Yeah, well, yes, young Earth creationism is one of those interesting things. When we get to the maps in a little bit that I am going to show you, when I was Googling around to find some maps, the Creation Center popped up as, and I just said, I'm not going to hit that link because I just don't know if I can trust that site to give me this story. But actually, from the biblical perspective, it's probably quite correct. It's just
They
later.
they take it quite literally.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
And it's always quite interesting. Like you talked about the story of Babel, and we're going to get further into that. But any of these stories were always about the concept that yes, other societies did have these stories. They were built off the original story, and the Hebrew story was the real
No,
story.
yeah. Well, it's fascinating because this continues all the way up to today. That okay, Adam must have spoken Hebrew. That's the pure language, right? And all the other ones are just derivative, as we will see in this story, right? They're all just messing it up a little bit, but. Yeah, you can decide on something and then pretty well make it work in your own mind anyway, like the flat earthers, for example. Well, let's pop back over and I'll get back to some now that we've settled that problem that that they had better DNA than we do. That
Got you on the flip side.
yeah. Let's get back over here. So there's Noah, and he has 3 sons that are going to people the earth: Japheth, Ham, and Shem. All right, now you're with me so far. What I'm looking at now today is Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. It's just a little story that appears. I use, as I mentioned before, the New Revised Standard Version because that is the closest translation to the original text, scholarly translations. And as we discussed last week, hey, King James Version is a whole lot more fun, but hey, this one is a little closer to the way the language actually reads. So let's take a peek for a moment here. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words, which I love, this concept. I mean, what is one language and the same words? In the King James Version, it says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. So, I don't quite know how you could have different words to your language, but there you go. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar. Now, the land of Shinar is the kingdom of Nimrod, who is the great grandson of Noah, probably a mythical figure. Hate to bust that balloon, but he probably didn't exist. But the idea is that he's a great hunter and a great king somewhere in southern Mesopotamia. The story probably occurs, as we'll look when what was probably the actual facts behind it in modern day Iraq, just south of Baghdad, probably is where this comes from. All right, and they settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks. So I've got my fire brick right here. Let us make bricks for stone, right? Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. So they're going to make them really hard, right? And they had brick for stone, which is and a very interesting turn of phrase if you stop to think about it. Stone apparently is like Hebrew, what all else comes down to, I guess. And bitumen for mortar, which is that's asphalt, right? So this is going to be a really stinky tower, and it's not going to be easy to work on it. That's for darn sure. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." So the human fear here is that they're going to get scattered out everywhere. and not be able to be in some kind of human community. So that's the human concern here. We will notice that that is not the problem that God has with all of this, Yahweh anyway. Now here's Nimrod, by the way, an ancient carving of Nimrod. You will notice something about him. He is traditionally considered African, and that is important to some exterior stories that occur. It really doesn't go anywhere in Hebrew scripture, but in other traditions, it's very important. I couldn't blow this one up any larger because, hey, scholarly books, they're not big and splashy. But one of FUS's friends, the humanist theologian Anthony Pinn, has done a book, edited a book called African American Religious Life and the Story of Nimrod, because Nimrod becomes a very important figure in the interpretation of how God works in the world in the Black church tradition. So there you go. But again, it's really not exactly in the text itself. This is the way people saw the world. I showed a similar one back when we looked at the Garden of Eden and where the heck that would have been. The assumption here is, of course, that the earth is flat. And it's a big disk here. And so we're looking down from the 5-mile view here. And you see how that the world gets divided up. Now, the peoples of this time didn't know all that much. Here in the Mediterranean basin anyway. So they've got Asia, they've got Europa, and they've got Africa. Now, Asia is settled by the Shem family, okay? Europa is by the Japheth family, and Africa by the Ham family. So so you got me so far. So they're the ones who are going to be the great progenitors here. So that's where the Ham people are going. All right, and just to make this a little, I could have used a good one from Noah's Ark fame here, but I didn't. An understanding of sort of how people were seeing this at the time. Of course, what they're really seeing is right here in Canaan is the important part of the world, and the rest of it is just sort of peripheral. But they also knew, of course, that Babylon, which is over here, Cush, which Nimrod is king of, is really, really important, because that's going to be Babylon, that's going to be Assyria, et cetera, et cetera. Just to be confusing, though, look what's way down here in Africa. Oh, it's Cush. No, it's not exactly like, the pilgrims showing up in America and naming everything Plymouth. No, it was just the fact that these develop apparently separately, but it was confused in the Bible narrative of that time. So this is the way they're understanding the world to be. Notice that Europe is actually pretty well Greece, right? So there you go. All right. Verse 5. The Lord, and I quickly mention for those of you who weren't listening on when I was doing Genesis and how the book of Genesis was written, there are at least 2 texts in it. One is the priestly text that probably was written sometime during the Babylonian exile or just thereafter, which is in the 500 BCEs. And then there is this other text. Some people call it the primordial text. How primordial is it, or the Yahwehist text, because Yahweh seems to be is the main character in a lot of these things. And the Yahweh character that appears, we can tell that these stories are much older because Yahweh is a guy who's walking around. Remember, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve has to hide from him because he likes to hang out in the garden in the cool of the evening. Well, here's Yahweh looking over the rim of heaven, seeing some things going down, and he's going to have to go down there and do some smiting, apparently. So the Lord, Yahweh, came down to see the city and the tower, which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." They're becoming too mighty. They are getting godlike in their understandings of what's going on. Come, let us go down. So we've got the lords of heaven, the sons of God. It's some kind of a court that Yahweh hangs out in. When we get to the book of Job, this is part of the story. Let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So Yahweh scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, it was called Babel, meaning gate of God. And I put this in quickly because actually Babel is not a Hebrew word, and it doesn't mean confusion as it's done in Hebrew, which is Balal. No, actually, Babel would have meant gate of God, and that's the way it appears in a couple of the other stories from the Near East. And actually, it is more informative if you stop and think about it, to think about this as being the gate to get to the gods. But that's not how the ancient Hebrews were seeing it. They thought the word meant confused, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Well, we better stop for some questions to make sure we're all going on in the same way here, and so I can get a sip of beer. If you have any questions, definitely shoot them in here, and if we don't know the answer, we'll make it up.
Well, there's a lot of making up going on when we talk about this period of time. That is for sure. John asked the question, Europe was quite a ways from Canaan. Would it have been the worst because it was too far away?
Yeah. I mean, how often do you hear of Japheth again? I mean, the guy, he definitely disappears from history. I mean, it is one of the great ironies of human history that the seed beds of the Western world, which are is Palestine and Greece, aren't that far from each other. You can pop right over on a very short flight or a boat ride, but they were a long way from each other in those days. And actually, it's a good thing, because both of those tribal peoples had a practice of totally decimating the other tribe when they won the war. So had they met up a little earlier, either Greece or the Hebrew tongue would have disappeared. Don't know which one, but the Western world would have been very different if they had gotten at each other along the way. So, yeah.
We've had a lot of interesting conversations happening. Martin from Facebook shared about that he learned the same theory that you did about the Tower of Babel from his Jesuit back in 1976. And then we had a little bit of conversation about genealogy over on the YouTube chat. It's always quite interesting as people start to dig on in, and I could definitely tell you it was quite interesting when you deal with Noah's genealogy, right? There was always conversations about that where I grew up and the groups that I grew up in. There was a lot of conversation about, so I grew up in Utah. I was with the Mormons. And the descendants of Ham were considered, because of their sin, they were considered to be they were considered to be not good people. I guess is the better way to put that, without going too off the rails there. So it even though that mentality and that methodology went down, the scriptures, even in the fundamentalist churches and the churches that I was in, still would hold to that. And we would always make, the little passes of the right political lens to put everything in so that you don't get in trouble. And then we would always say, that's the reason we send missionaries to Africa, to save their souls, because that's the only thing that it's good for. But
the idea
goes right back to that Ham, right back to there. And we would use that to disenfranchise a lot of people within our churches that I was in.
Yeah, well, and isn't it interesting how Christians then become the chosen people? Hey, Presto and Tango here. No, we're not the Japheth people. Actually, now we get to be the chosen people. That when you start othering others, it gets contradictory pretty quickly. Oh, and I should admit, yay to get to study with the Jesuits. I learned what Latin I do know from a Jesuit, and who know Latin pretty well, by golly, and also know their Bible very well. A slightly different one than we Protestants know, but there you go. Absolutely.
John asked the question, and I'll throw this on up into the thing. Is the problem with these people that they got to know too much and thus lost respect for God? Trouble with those humanists putting our knowledge over God's?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, with the Garden of Eden story, the knowledge of good and evil. Why would a God want to keep the knowledge of good and evil away from people? And when they did get it, how come they can't? How come they have to be run out of Eden? And one of the explanations within Hebrew tradition I find very fascinating is, remember in the Garden of Eden, God keeps saying, and it was good, and it was good, right? So everything God creates is good, right? And then suddenly you've got this good and evil. Well, where the heck is the evil? I mean, that ain't good, right? And the actual story, the serpent is not evil. He's not Satan. That's not the way the actual story goes. That's later Christian making it up a little bit to make it fit into the idea of original sin. So what's going on there? And within Hebrew tradition, I think a major strain is that evil is only in the thoughts of humanity. There's no evil in the world, actually. It's just what people think of to do, right? and so if that's anywhere behind the story, you can see how the gods would be up in the clouds saying, wait a minute, these people who understand evil are coming our way. And, what are they going to do when they get up here, right? So I think that's the fear that's going on. Yeah. So, yes, having knowledge is the most dangerous thing in the Near Eastern understanding of what humanity in face of the gods are like. And that's why those Nephilim were so dangerous when the sons of God thought the human women were very beautiful and started producing children. Those were very dangerous kinds of beings to have around, because again, they might have gotten past this tower thing and actually gotten up there. So that's part of the interesting thing here is, it's a little, almost a children's story about how we got human languages all over the world. But there's a deeper thing going on here about the transgression of what belongs to the gods, right? Raiding the gods' world and getting something. But what would that be, right? So, yeah.
We were told constantly that it was about disobedience, right? And so the way I was told is you had God gave a very direct and strong command to Noah. Noah didn't follow through with his sons. They ended up culminating in grouping together and forming a human society and grouping. And because they were disobedient to God, that is the reason why, that is the reason he drove the languages and to drive them apart. Now, of course, we know, right, understanding languages, whether you have a different language or not, that's not going to separate you.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. That's not going to work for very long, because now we have all of these cool programs that you can listen to in your sleep, and then you will know all the languages. But and again, that's the tension in the Christian reading of this. These people are doing the wrong thing. They have to be punished, and they have to be split apart, and because they're evildoers. In the more traditional Hebrew way of understanding it, though, I mean, how are we going to have these wonderful cities? How are we going to have human civilization if this doesn't happen? So Yahweh needs to make it happen so that people can achieve civilization. Again, one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, wait, cities are all bad. We have some political parties that believe that in the world. Cities are all bad. It's always good to be out there in the country. So let's get out to Abraham. Let's get him some sheep in a tent. And that's the real way to live and worship God correctly. So, there's a lot going on, and you can, pull pieces off of it and spin it around as we go. Well, let's pop back over here and take one more little look at what's going on, so that a little bit of the history of the thing. So and many scholars think this. There's been obviously almost every inch of Iraq has been dug up to try to find things. The Tower of Edamonaki, I don't know, I guess, is probably what the real structure is behind all of this story. It is the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. It's a ziggurat that is in ancient Babylon, and pieces of it are still there today. If it existed, and if this is it, it would be roughly 300 feet tall, they think, because 300 feet is about as far as you can go when you're building stuff out of clay bricks, because the weight itself of the building is going to take the building down. So it didn't reach heaven, that's for darn sure, but 300 feet was pretty tall back in those days. So Edamonaki was probably around 300 feet high, and it was the great structure in Babylon, probably, and a temple to the god Marduk, the great god of the Babylonian peoples. And this is, an artist's rendition of how that probably looked. This around the area here would be the court area, the place where the high muckety mucks live. The other people are going to be living out in the outback out there. This is downtown Babylon and the most important building. And the text kind of tells us that because it says it's a tower and a city. It's a tower and a city. So this tower is the most important bit, but it's so cool that you got to talk about it as separate from the city. So this is probably how it did look. And more of it would exist today, except for the fact that Alexander the Great came along, conquering in that area, and found the ruins of the tower, which tradition said was the Tower of Babel, and he had it taken apart in order to rebuild it. But guess what? And this isn't in scripture, but I guess he got it too, because he indeed died before he was able to put the Tower of Babel back together. And so today it is a heap of stones out in the middle of the desert, about 50 miles south of Baghdad. Yeah, that's about all that's left of the greatest of human civilizations from that time period. And there you go. That's as much as we probably know about the history of the actual tower that was going on there. So there you have it. Any other questions about this particular story? Now we're going to go forth. We're going to have a whole bunch of children and populate the world and speak all these different cool languages. And that's the way the story goes. So.
We don't have any specific questions yet. So I want to make sure to call out to all of you. We want your questions. We want to dive into this. This is not a one-way conversation. We want to talk back and forth. We want to hear your thoughts about these passages, because the best way for us to learn is to constantly question and challenge each other.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and these are fun stories. They do have, the stories are told, and sometimes they're very explicitly, and God did this, and God said that. But often, especially in the oldest of the Hebrew stories, they are a little bit wonky as to what exactly are they talking about here? Because we remember my favorite character, Tubal-Cain, the brass maker. Here he is, the father of brass making, and we have this whole story about how people, right after the Garden of Eden story, how they populate the world, and then in some stories, apparently they go on, and the flood doesn't happen, because because how are they related, right? And, but then we get these other stories about how everybody gets wiped out, and all of that pre-story is all for naught, and forget about that. And these stories are both there in the text, completely contradictory genealogies. I know young earthers don't think that, but it does appear the best answer is that they were probably two different texts coming in from very, very different times, with very, very different programs behind what the writers were working on and doing that. So yeah. Any other questions that we have that anyone has?
Nope.
And Okay, well, next week I won't be here. We'll have our resident Bible scholar, Wendy Jerome, coming in. Then the following week, we'll pop, what's a young earth? And then the next, we'll pop back to Christian scriptures, and I like going back and forth, get a little variety. But yes, what is a young earther? We did not define that word, and we should have that term. So tell us.
Well, a young earther is someone who would hold to, and this is the one who most commonly promoted this myth, was a person by the name of John Morris. Henry Morris, I apologize. John is his son. Henry Morris was very prolific. He was an engineer that then came out, and there's a whole story, and we can get into it, but it's not, and he started promoting this whole concept that the earth is this specific thing. And it's based, the concept behind it is the inerrancy of the biblical scriptures.
Right.
And because it's inerrant, we must understand the timeline of that inerrancy, which means that at most, this earth is only 10,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And we must accept that. Even if we feel like the world is lying to us with the evidence that we have out there, the Bible is accurate, and thus we must be able to connect and relate our stuff. And the problem, of course, when you build from that model is you're starting with the end goal in mind and not looking at where does the facts lead us. And so it's a very powerful mythos that is built up around this. And if you put any faith or stock into the biblical definition of the Bible, then you have to start to ask some of these questions. And the Bible lays these things out. And while there are those people who can stretch it on out, you then struggle, and then you have to ask the question, well, what is legit Bible? What is not legit Bible? How did the Bible get written? And when you start to ask those questions, that creates some very interesting paradigm shifts. Mm-hmm. A lot of people out there don't ask these questions, but for people in my denomination and my churches, we answered those questions with our version of science that was called creation science. And that led us to being a quote unquote young earther. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. Yeah. The Noah. I have not seen the Noah's Ark thing, but it is Ken Ham that is the guy who did that. I don't know if there's actually Jesus riding on a dinosaur or not. That's the certainly the humanist folktale out there that there is Jesus either petting or riding on a dinosaur.
And we have William say, is that why there's a Christian theme park in which humans exist at the same time as dinosaurs? There's not one. There's several. Yeah. You have ICR in California. You have Dinosaur Park down with Kent Hovind. You have Answers in Genesis with the Ark Museum. You have the Creation Museum. And then there are several in between of smaller camps around the United States. And then to go into the next question, which would be from John. Mm-hmm. Where is Bishop Usher's findings of the timeline fit in this? John Morris was not the first. John Morris was the one that started the giant prolification of these theories in the 80s. Yeah. And it started with ICR, 70s and 80s. ICR really exploded that. Then you had Ken Ham build upon that stuff and then push that much further to the United States and then taking it out. But absolutely.
Yeah, and well, yes, and Bishop Usher is the Victorian era guy who really starts doing this. They're digging in Victorian England. They're blowing up mountains, and they're seeing all these fossils. They're seeing all these layers out there, and they're discovering, well, heck, the world must be really, really old. And remember, one of the amazing things about this is that actually Darwin, as he's coming up with this theory, had no idea how old the Earth was. This information was occurring basically at the same time. So, but he was discovering this, and the geologists were discovering this, and Bishop Usher was saying, "Wait a minute, no, the world is 4,000, blah, blah, blah," and he had it all figured out, right? I mean, he literally had it figured out to the day, and how he got there was by doing, Noah was 969, and figuring backwards like that. I mean, really, I mean, what you have to think of, I think, is that this is all motivated, motivated thinking to prove that the Bible I believe in is true. That's what Bishop Usher was doing, and that's that's what John Morris was doing. It's why Christians often homeschool. They don't want that biology teacher talking about the evolution of fruit flies or the Galapagos or anything like that, because it messes with the dominant narrative of this particular group. So.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. I mean, to me, it makes no sense at all that you would want to hold on to that. But it is very, very important. If you're going to be fundamentalist, that's the only way to be fundamentalist, because it says so in there, right?
And the situation gets really nerve-wracking. So I love the quote that you put on First Unitarian's Facebook group about a week ago, or it was 2 weeks ago, where it was the concept that scientists don't need fan groups because it's easy to prove, right? When we look at the data, it's there. Flat earthers have to become very insular. Creationists have to become very insular, because that's the only way that it keeps going. It's quite interesting and quite scary when you start to build these models on out, and how many of the philosophies, this is the evilness, or the, as I would say, the big problems with places like ICR, is they push models like teach the controversy. Right now, Texas is still ongoing almost every 2 years, a very large legal battle with whenever you go to the school boards. So John may know this very well. I watch these almost every other year, where creationist goes into the school boards in Texas, and because Texas is so large, they control much of the books across the entire nation. And then they promote these philosophies and these belief systems, and many times they get in.
Yeah.
It's without challenging and building the questions and asking about curiosity that we can actually start to say, how do we understand the world that we're in?
Mm-hmm. I lived in the state of Mississippi in the late 1980s, and while I was there, they literally passed a state law that no book could say that the wind did not come from God. You could not say the wind comes to us from any other source but God, by state law in Mississippi. And the Scopes monkey trial. I mean, just the disagreements. It's motivated thinking. And as Justice was saying, it. The more you're embattled, the more you're going to believe it. And that's the thing. It's not that they're going to go, aha, those humanists are right after all. No, they're just going to believe it harder, right, and get more insular.
But the thing that I want to make sure is really clear is it's not about how smart you are.
Right.
Because I've met many brilliant people. As you were saying, John, Charles and Carol Thaxton, right? These guys are not, these people are not dumb. Mm-hmm. They're very, very, very smart. The problem is, again, they're approaching to a problem with a defined conclusion, and out of that comes out the logical steps that get them to those locations. And it creates very scary processes when I've seen biologists, when I've seen, like my father worked sound systems for testing nuclear missiles, right? This guy's brilliant, genius, but still leading and running creation seminars and talking about a 6,000-year-old Earth and the problems with UFOs.
Yeah. There you go. No, it's really amazing that, and I guess it's a testament to how smart those tower builders are, that we can create entire realities that are, that have a few premises here at the bottom, and then we can start building and build a cohesive worldview that is really based on very little. But there you have it. That's the way we are.
We have hit the time limit, David.
All right. Well.
Yeah, it has been just so absolutely awesome to be with every one of you, and you, John. This has been a blast talking about the early books of Genesis. We're not done. We have our after hour. We had to have our after party. I'm throwing the Zoom link, and that meeting will be started quite shortly into chat.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
yeah, so we're going to go ahead and join on in. Let's have a longer conversation. Let's take
Yep.
some of these things and get your guys'
Yep.
viewpoints. Let's hear your voices around these. Now, we will be back next week. Wendy Jerome and myself will be out here. We'll be digging on in and seeing where we go with this. And just so that you guys are aware, Coffee and Wisdom, Monday
Oh, yeah.
through Friday, 9 a.m. Right here on the Dinner Conversation, as well as now we have it released as a podcast, and you can join on in there. And starting tomorrow, Bibles and Beer will also be functioning as a podcast. You can find all that information on firstunitarian.org.
Yay! All right. Thank
If
you.
you're after to help firstunitarian.org, First Unitarian Society out to continue pushing this humanist content, please take a look at firstunitarian.org/donate. We could definitely use your help. And if you can't provide anything from a monetary perspective, we can always use some help with some conversation, as well as please share, subscribe. Let's get this information on out there.
Put
Let's
it out there.
take this knowledge out to the masses, and let's start having the conversations to build the connections with the world. Thanks all for joining.
Thanks.
I think it's time to sign off. Anything else you want to say, David, before we take a step back?
Time to go to the fridge and get a beer, everybody. We'll see you in a minute.
It's all right, David. My tower's bigger than yours.
Watch out. God will get you.